So we're going to have a look at the shawl here. I've had a few questions from people about the setup row and casting on. So I'm using circular needles, which are what we use in the shawl pattern, except usually you'd be using thinner ones and thinner yarn, but today for ease of viewing we're using the thick ones. So we start off with one stitch on our needle. Actually, this is your what's it called, slip knot. There you go. I'm going to cast on 5 stitches. I'm going to do it quite loosely because we come to a bit where it's a bit tricky to get your needle through if you've done it too tightly. So cast on 5. So we've got 2, 3. If you need help with casting on, we've already got videos and it's also in your instruction booklet as well. 4 and one more. 5. So now we've got 5 stitches on, we need to do what's called the setup row, where you have to knit front and back 5 times. So when you knit front and back, you're talking about 1 stitch, you're knitting into that stitch 2 times. So we are going to knit once, but before we pull our stitch off, we're going to stick our right hand needle into the back of that same stitch. It might look a bit fiddly at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's okay. And we're going to knit that again. And then now you see we've turned 1 stitch into 2 stitches on our right hand needle. So we're going to do that 5 times. So this is our second time. And before I pull it off, I'm going to stick it back in and pull it off. There we go. So we've turned 2 stitches into 4. Same again to the end of the row. This is why you need to cast on loosely, because otherwise it can be a little bit tricky to get your needle in. I think I just about cast on okay. Ta-da, nearly there. And our last stitch. So again, before we pull it off, stick it back in the back and cast it off. So now you should see in our brackets it says we should have 10 stitches. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Phew, no mistakes so far. So now what we're going to do is we're into our setup row, which basically is our second one that we need to do to get all the pattern in place. So we're going to slip 1 stitch pairwise, which means we need to have our yarn at the front. And we just stick our right needle in and pull off that first stitch. We're going back to knitting, so that yarn needs to go to the back between the needles. And then again, we're going to knit front and back this next stitch. So it's a bit easier this time. So now we've knit front and back. We need to put our yarn forward. So we bring it between the needles. And then we are instructed to knit 2. So there we go. So when you've brought your yarn forward, you bring it round the back. So that's knit 1, knit 2. Been told to bring our yarn forward again. So bring it between the needles and then to knit 1. Then the instructions tell us to place a marker. So your marker can be anything. It can be a little scrappy piece of yarn, but I happen to have a marker here, so I'm going to use my yellow one. Place marker just means stick it on your needles. Then we're going to knit 3. So 1, 2, 3. Got 1 more knit front and back, so turning this stitch into 2, knit it. The more you use your circular needles, by the way, the less bendy they'll be, so it'll be a bit easier. Knit 1, that's our last one on this row, and our pattern is telling us that we should have 14 stitches on our needle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You might notice that there's not an even split of the stitches on either side of the marker. Don't worry about it, that's what it's meant to be like. And that will all come together. So we just have one more row to do, and that is our pattern row. So again, we are slipping, so yarn forward, slip that stitch purlwise. This is when the pattern gets really easy. So knit 2, 1, 2, oops, we're going to put a yarn forward. All these yarn forwards are going to give us our lovely little lace holes, by the way. So knit to 1 stitch before marker. Okay, well that's pretty easy. Are we 1 stitch before our marker? Our marker is here, we've got 1 stitch, so this is where we put another yarn forward. Ooh, ooh. And then knit 1. Then the instructions tell us to slip the marker. Slipping the marker is easy, just means you move it from one needle to the other. And then we finish with knit to the end of the row. Ooh, 1, 2. You might find some of the stitches seem big and floppy. That's because that's where we've done a yarn forward on the previous row. So that's where you're going to have a nice, see for example this one, it's all big and floppy. That's where you're going to have a nice lace hole. Don't worry about it, you haven't done anything wrong. And then the easiest thing about this pattern is you just keep doing that row all the way until the end.